Hello, this is Alan Wheeler, and today I believe I'll be doing a video. Hopefully, it will end up as close to my heart as it's starting. Um, and the topic, the title will be something like Tarot Cards Answer the Christian-Pagan Debate. And if you haven't seen my channel before, recently I've been looking at spirituality with the use of tarot cards. Recently, I've been in the habit of introducing things from my altar, and this Christmas slash Yule, I purchased a brand new set of Ogham. I believe I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, but the Irish symbols that work something like the Norse runes, known as Ogham. And I just drew, it looks like the number 4, again, my pronunciation will be off, Sele. It's associated with the willow tree, uh, feminine mysteries, the cycles of the moon, wisdom of the moon, uh, the water, and healing, I think, sometimes along with that. I picture a willow tree growing by the waters. So that's just an example. Earlier I drew 3 tarot cards and 1 Ogham stick. Now these sticks, interestingly, they're each one comes from the tree that they represent. So um, the one I just drew would have been from a willow tree, for example. And so there's 20 of the original symbols here in the set. I drew 1 and 3 tarot cards. However, by way of introduction to the topic, let me just say that Christianity and paganism have a long, complicated history, sometimes attacking one another, sometimes borrowing from one another. So I did a quick review before clicking record, and of course, in history we have the Roman polytheism that initially that first dominated and persecuted Christians. So we have the picture of the Christians in the lion's den or fighting in the Colosseum, um, and so on. However, Christianity was then adopted by leaders like Constantine, and it became dominant, and then that religion began forcing itself onto people, and so it's been rough, other than, from what I can tell, other than about 100-year period, according to Wikipedia. Now it was from 313 through 391, that there was kind of a coexistence, or at least both were legal. And then today, of course, we know that it's very complicated, and my theory or my hypothesis is that both groups feel persecuted. So some years ago, when I would identify as a full-fledged Orthodox Christian, conservative, traditional Christian, I felt the minority. I, had the pictures of the being fed to lions and so on, and most of secular society is against us. Now, as I experiment with alternative paths, alternative ideas, suddenly I feel, oh my gosh, everything else is Christian, and this is the true I'm in the true minority now. So these are kind of narratives and feelings, I think, that complicate matters. Um, Now, some of it, I think, is just plain misunderstanding, where no offense is intended. Um, a Christian might tend to chop down a tree and build a chapel or build a church and have no bad intentions, um, not thinking that tree is sacred um, in a very divine sense, um, even though Christians might, in theory, believe that um, it's the garment of God, that nature is a, God's creation, and so on. Um, so I think there's just lack of dialogue and problems that way. Now, some things have been borrowed over the years. There's been some synthesis, and so, of course, we know holidays um, and practices like Yule, bringing in the greenery, the Christmas trees, have been taken up by Christians. Sometimes Jesus and Mary are adopted um, by pagans. So there, in um, a lot of principles and ideas, uh, love, what would be common to probably all faiths as an ideal, for example. So there's some borrowing and overlap going on. I think at the folk level, um, we have a lot of eclectic practice and syncretism and borrowing, so that we um, see a lot of mystical practices among Catholics, for example, and Mary becoming the divine feminine there, and things like that. Um, and we'd also see Protestant Christians maybe identifying the Holy Spirit as the divine feminine, um, and looking to Sophia and things like that, kind of on the border lines of the coexistence. I think that uh, pluralism and globalization is probably helping. And then there's even some formal groups that, excuse me, I'm going to pause just a minute. So there's some, sorry about the lag. So there's even some formal groups, uh, Christo-Pagans, some would identify as Christian Wicca, of course, the Unity Church and the Unitarian Universalist churches would be welcoming to all kinds of diverse and alternative beliefs, as far as my experience of them. So I just said that there's a lot of eclecticism and syncretism, by which I mean overlapping and blending of practices at the folk level, but there's also a lot of fear and misunderstanding at that folk level, um, so that sometimes pagans are accused of being devil worshippers, or unchristian or uncivilized. Um, and on the flip side, Christians uh, can be accused of being anti earth, um, patriarchal, uh, completely exclusive, and harshly evangelistic, and so on. So I just recently heard on a YouTube video of in Ireland, sometimes pagans being referred to as dirty pagans. So there's just even at the casual day-to-day level, the folk level, there's misunderstanding. Well, I have a lot more sitting with this issue um, as I try alternative paths without completely leaving the good things I see in the Christian faith. So I drew 3 cards and an Ogham symbol to address this question, mostly for myself and also in thinking about how to communicate with others about this issue. And the symbol that I drew was this one. And it's, I'll probably pronounce this wrong, but it's ONN, I believe, own. And the tree, so to speak, that it represents is the gorse bush. And this symbol represents burgeoning passion because it grows so prolifically, so wildly, and also resilience because it's burned back and it comes back. So I see this as that tendency in our identities and our communities and in our faith to be passionate. And these issues are perennial. They keep coming back. And so it's not something that's not going away, like that gorse bush, that gorse plant. A very resilient issue. And I think maybe even we could consider there's something at the core important. There may be reasons that these the conflict, the conversation does not go away. So I drew 3 cards from my mini Rider-Waite-Smith deck, and I first purchased these after first purchasing a video recording by Kelly Ann Maddox, a tarot reading, in which she used these cards. And so I drew 3 to help me continue contemplating this issue. And the first was the 7 of Cups. And this speaks to me of the kind of how the imagination, whether in mystical experiences, such as the prophets would have, John in the book of Revelation having these visions of heaven and things like that. But this aspect of spirituality and religion that really speaks to our hopes and dreams and our imaginations, that goes beyond the empirical, and for good and bad. So it's just an element that leads to maybe different experiences, different ideas, and the cultures and the mythos and the things that are birthed are very important to individuals and groups. And so this card may remind us that we may imagine things in different ways. We may experience emotions in these wild ways. And we have many choices, in a sense. And one may be right for us or for a group or for a time. But this may be part of the equation for me to think about and to communicate about as I consider this issue, the Christian-Pagan debate. The second card I drew was Judgment. And the two sides I see are both acceptance, as these people are rising up in liberation and coming to life, and at the same time judgment, that they're facing some kind of truth or some kind of justice as they come out. And I think this is a lot of times we see it expressed in different ways, but there's a sense of, I hate to use the word righteousness because it's so tied up in Christian jargon, but there's a sense of right and wrong, a sense of injustice. And one of the functions of religion, in my mind, is sorting through that. And so pagans who find fault with some of the Christian practices are in a way right, are in a way helpful, bringing that critical thinking to the table. And so I think of Buddha appearing on the scene and doing away with a lot of the superstition of the Hindu faith, kind of bringing correction to an imbalance, if you want to look at it that way. Or Jesus, who appears on the scene and is highly critical of the religious leaders and speaks most harshly against them. And so even while he's hanging out with prostitutes and drunkards and accepting people, as I see part of this card, that acceptance, he's highly critical of the religious leaders and how they've twisted using that organized religion wrongly. So I think this card is whatever faith you're coming from, whatever path you're walking, using that discernment is part of the walk. The last card I drew was the Two of Pentacles, and here we see the familiar juggler and the rough seas behind him, those boats being tossed up on turbulent waves, and yet there's the eternal flow as he spins these pentacles. So we have that sense of balance and harmony and mixing. So I do see here a kind of coexistence, even syncretism, of these two approaches, the Christian and the pagan. Again, I asked the question for me, or how to communicate. And so when I think of other twos, I would think of the Two of Cups as harmony between people. Maybe a Jewish person marrying a Christian person, that harmony between people, although they have differences, in the Two of Cups. In swords, I would see that mental dialectic, that debate, and so on. But here, in a way, the practical things in practice and in working together in this realm of the pentacles, of the coins, this card is maybe reminding that there can be a coexistence, a tolerance, an acceptance, and a balance of these, whether it's practices or beliefs played out in the real world. So I will stop here, but that is the reading on the Christian-Pagan debate. And please, if you have any thoughtful comments, leave them as I continue to consider this on my blended path. Thanks for watching, and as always, I hope you feel connection with people in your life, with online community, and on your spiritual path, whatever that might be. Thanks again. Take care.